Well, welcome to a brand new episode of Sports Chat Podcast. For those that don't know, yes, I am your host, creator, Brooke Brown, or as I'm well known on the interwebs in social media land as Saxy15. And I decided to bring this podcast back. It's been a tough going. Long story short. All right, let's start with the long story. So, about 11, 12, maybe 13 years ago, I began a series on YouTube using Google Plus Hangout on air technology. For those that don't know, Google Plus was Google's attempt to make their version of Facebook many, 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 many years ago. It did not go well. They dismantled it piece by piece, feature by feature, and it no longer exists. But back in the day, uh, I had just gotten out of college and had some time on my hands, mainly due to the fact that we were in the middle of the recession. And I, well, growing up, I've always been a big fan of sports. I was, and music. Now, that has kind of changed over the course of my life. I would say I'm more into music than I am sports these days. But I wanted to bring this podcast back now that I have the tools to do so. So anyway, to go back to the story, I started the show called sportschat.tv. The website doesn't exist anymore, but the episodes do on YouTube. If you're watching this currently on YouTube, or you will be watching this in replay on YouTube, head over to the Sports Chat TV playlist. There you will find all those old school episodes that had the old Google Plus Hangout on air technology that was actually the first of its kind now that we've all lived in a virtual world due to Zoom and all that over the last couple of years, really because of the pandemic, but more because Zooms and Teams and all these GoToMeeting and all these platforms have been built. And currently, the one I'm speaking to you on Restream, shout out to them. But I created that and made a lot of episodes, learned a lot. In fact, I learned from and about the wonderful world of fin swimming. Look that up. That's a sport. It's hardcore in the world too. And I learned from the Australian Football Federation and a bunch of people that were networking back in the day. So, needless to say, it was fun. I did that for many years. And then, as Google Plus was dismantling itself, I started my other podcast that most people will be aware of called Trending Topics with BB. I've been doing that pretty much since then. It started as a Google Plus Hangout on air and on YouTube, and then I went to audio, and now I do both for that. And just reached episode 151 this past week. So, in that long time, 2 years ago, I decided, two or three, maybe almost 4 years ago, I wanted to kind of transition sportschat.tv to sports chat podcast. And then I searched my friends and network for a co host. Ron Rinaldi was on the first couple episodes. So for those that have listened to those episodes, hope you enjoyed them. I say they're the first season of 2 episodes. I had a blast talking sports with him back in the day, but our schedules basically changed, just stopped. That, life happens. Everybody's lives happen. This is a few years ago. And then since then, yes, I've been working on the other podcasts and other content and life and my day job and all that. And this podcast was put on the back burner mainly because obviously I'm not as into sports as I used to be. And I thought at the time that I needed a co host in order to pique my interest and have like lively uh, conversations. Excuse me. But I decided that I still know a lot about sports, and I still want to talk about sports. And so I wanted to do this episode at the end of 2021, call it the 2021 year sports in review episode. And for those that'll be watching this in video form, currently on Twitch right now, or YouTube, or as a replay on the Facebook page as well. Um, I also have the ability to share, screen share some sports headlines. But before I get into that, I want everybody to head over to this. We'll just check this link out. This is where you'll find the podcast for now. Anchor.fm/sports chat podcast. The first two episodes are located. It's also on a bunch of other platforms, which are linked here as well. So if you go to this link, you can find it on whatever podcasting platform you enjoy. If you enjoy the content, feel free to leave a favorable rating or comment, specifically if you're on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or anywhere that you can, please, as I try to bring this back. It's going to be more of a seasonal podcast, meaning that I'm going to do a few episodes here or there. It's not going to be like my other podcast, Trending Topics with BB, that is constant with episodes. But I did want to talk about sports tonight, and leave you in 2021 with some thoughts that I have on some headlines. So let me pull this up here. 1 second. I actually want to start with a headline close to home. All right. So I'm not the biggest hockey fan. I'm not going to pretend. I do find hockey very entertaining. I've been to a few games in my day, specifically the Arizona Coyotes that we're going to talk about. I've been to some I don't know what they call them, lower league games in different cities. But I wanted to bring this up because for those that don't know, there has been talks back and forth between the Arizona Coyotes and the surrounding cities here in Phoenix because currently their stadium is in Glendale. And they have been in this battle where they said they've paid they had all this back taxes, and the city of Glendale is like, you got to friggin' pay or we're gonna kick you out. We're gonna lock you out of your own stadium, which is hilarious. Because side note, I've been to more concerts in their stadium than I actually have been to hockey games. But in fact, one a couple last month. So it's just interesting to me that I saw this headline that they're ordered to pay 1.3 million in back taxes in order to keep the stadium, mainly because from previous headlines that I've read over the last couple of years, they want a new stadium and they're trying to figure out where to build or if they're going to stay in Arizona as an expansion team. So I just thought this was interesting, but yeah, it says city officials on Wednesday announced they would cancel the team's business license and lock the Coyotes out of the arena if the team did not make it on a late payments to the state and city. Okay, that's economics 101. The NHL team attributed its delinquent payment, some 1.3 million in sales tax owed to the state, with 250,000 of it owed to Glendale, to a possible human error. So somebody forgot to pay or refused to pay. I don't know what that means. A tax lien from the revenue department shows the team had to pay nearly $66,000 in penalties and interest for the back taxes. That's a lot of freaking money. But also, you're a freaking NHL team. Why don't you have your shit together? I know I should probably have a little bit more decorum when talking about this, but I mean, seriously, like, why not pay what you need to be paying? Um, so I thought that's interesting. um, anyway, so I mean, I'm sure a lot of the Arizona Coyote fans, the diehards here, are know a lot more about what's going on with that but I just thought that headline was interesting. Like they literally were gonna about to be locked out of what is known as Gila River Arena if they didn't pay back taxes. So that's interesting. All right. Moving on to another headline. Before I talk about, hold on. Yeah. So this is interesting to me. I am a proponent of women's sports, and I know there's a big controversy in sports general right now about trans athletes. And before I put my 2 cents on that topic, I wanted to bring up about the LPGA players drawing a moral line against playing in China. So, if you don't know, a recent headline: President Biden and a bunch of other dignitaries have decided not to attend the upcoming Olympics due to a lot of stuff having to do with China and the political decisions that China makes. And so, in solidarity with the president, the LPGA has pulled out of playing in China. And I saw this headline and I was like, that's interesting. But we're in that time now where everybody's boycotting and doing what they want to do, which is fine. Um, but I, in this article, I find it fascinating that it goes with the current headline of what the president's doing with the Olympics, but also it's interesting to me that something that maybe would have been inevitable is actually getting the news that it's deemed, specifically for women's sports, um, amid a league that arguably doesn't get the coverage that their male counterparts do, in my opinion. I mean, you know more about, even if you're not a golf fan, you know more about the PGA, just mainly because people want to know what's happening with Tiger Woods these days, whether he's going to play or not, or just the many different players that are playing in the PGA more than you would the LPGA, because years ago there was a player, Michelle Wie, who everybody talked about, who was compared to Tiger Woods, and everybody was talking about the LPGA for about like a second, and then like you haven't really heard about it. So I thought this was great. I mean, they're gonna boycott going to the Olympics to be in solidarity with what the president and everybody else is doing in the IOC. So that should be interesting. So I want to know who's actually going to be playing in the Olympics if everybody's boycotting. The last couple of Olympics have been interesting because of the pandemic. So we'll see. um, and for those that are like going to listen to this podcast or are watching this in replays, what are your thoughts on just the overall vibe surrounding both the summer and the winter Olympics? I think the pandemic has changed people's perspective on it, but that could just be the vibe I get. So I want to talk about the fact that as a kid, I grew up a huge NBA fan until I went to college and I got into college basketball and college football. When you're in college, you're into it. But I was a friggin' huge NBA fan growing up. Maybe all the way until even when I was an adult. So I would say the mystique of the NBA wore off about 6 to 7 years ago for me, mainly because everybody I admired or grew up with as players either was retiring or retiring then becoming coaches, which is currently where we're at now, or the game has changed because of rule changes, and specifically with player worship. I'm one of the rare ones that don't consider LeBron a GOAT. He's not the greatest of all time. And the comparisons to Michael Jordan, I grew up with Michael Jordan. Therefore, uh, there's no comparison. And if you haven't watched the documentary The Last Dance that was on Netflix, that was produced originally on ESPN, you should check out that documentary. Uh, Mainly, I'm also of the opinion about Michael Jordan too, being it. Michael Jordan would have been the greatest had he not had all the players around him, specifically Scottie Pippen. Um, Man, Scottie Pippen was my jam back in the day, and a lot of people were like, "Well, it's Michael," and I was like, "No, but you can't have Michael without Scottie Pippen and the rest of the team." But anyway, and then along came Kobe Bryant, and I will say because I grew up here in Arizona with the ups and downs, but mostly downs of the Phoenix Suns until recently, I wasn't always the biggest LA Laker fan. um, because we're considered rivals. But I can respect like the greats from a long time ago, like a Magic Johnson or a Wilt Chamberlain, or back in the day when Larry Bird was playing, Dr. J, all of the greats. But when Kobe Bryant came along, and then he was like one of the first like worshipped players. And I'm not saying he wasn't a good player, but it changed the game after Michael when Kobe came along. And I think I will say, with the exception of Kevin Garnett, I've always been against, in my lifetime, players going straight from high school to the NBA. Um, I don't. I think you should at least have a year or two of college ball before you go to the NBA. And I've always said this, not just because I'm an adult now. I said this when I was a kid. I was a weird one like that. Was like, why are they? And I like Kevin Garnett, but even Kevin Garnett wasn't. He came to the league and had to kind of work his way up compared to like a Kobe Bryant or what most of the kids find as their favorite player today, LeBron James. And therefore, I always found myself being like on the minority in a lot of ways in my thought process towards players going from high school to the NBA. Anyway, so the worship of players to me, because some of my all-time favorite player, I will just put it out there, is Jason Kidd. Right below that, Steve Nash. And the reason why I love those two point guards in my lifetime, who are now coaches, by the way, is because they were not ball hogs. Okay, they're not going to be like even if you look back and you watch The Last Dance, the documentary, and you watch all those the era of the six Bulls championships, Michael Jordan was a ball hog. Anybody that can score that many points in a game means that they had the ball in their hands majority of the fucking game. Okay, therefore, that's the definition of a ball hog. But that doesn't make it entirely for it to be a team sport when one player has the ball the whole time. Therefore, I don't like basically the thought process that, one player, being the MVP. An MVP to me in basketball is somebody that can score, rebound, assist, but mostly I'm all about the assists. I mean, I enjoyed the fact that like Jason Kidd and Steve Nash were always in the hunt for like triple doubles. And for those that don't know, or even double doubles, but triple doubles is when you're double figures in scoring, rebounding, and assists. But I just love they dished. And I grew up actually playing basketball when I was a kid, even into high school. And I emulated my playing over passing the ball more than scoring. I mean, I had a mean sick jump shot, but I enjoyed assisting my teammates and making them look better. So when it comes to how I grew up watching players and being coached and coaching others, the NBA to me was fun until it became about one player throughout the league. And LeBron's entire career, it's been about, okay, what team is he on? Who's around him? And how many championships? And the same happened with Kobe. And in fact, I will say personally, I didn't like Kobe Bryant when he was a player. I personally liked him as a retired player and what he did to give back to the city of LA after he was a player was a lot more admirable. So which is it was sad a couple years that he passed away because he was doing so much good for the city of LA. But anyway, my point being is the game has changed when it's about one player. Also, the pace of the game has changed. They've changed rules. I will say I like Adam Silver as a commissioner in the NBA more than I liked David Stern. But then again, I grew up with David Stern, and I haven't really watched or paid attention to as much of the NBA since Adam Silver has been a the commissioner. But I will say, when you change certain rules, it changes the game. Specifically, I will talk about basically what is considered and what is not considered illegal defense. So growing up, when I played basketball, there was a thing called man to man, and there was a defense called zone defense. Now, when I was really young, zone defense in the NBA was considered illegal defense, and any team that was partaking in a 2-3 zone or a 3-2 zone, which means there was three players at the top of the key, and two down below, or vice versa, or any like non man to man when you're like paired guarding another man player, like set of defense. Let's get back to my train of thought. When basically that became you could do that, and then another rule about the same time flipped. I remember there used to be a rule that if about the 3-second defensive rule at by the basket down below, that became not a rule either. Where because well, and in and out, it's had its ways, but the reason why I talk about those two rules is that it changed the pace of the game based on the physicality of the players. And because the NBA has been, well, just because in professional sports it happens a lot with the trading of players, with the money that certain teams have over the others, and the overall way the league works in business transactions. When a team, when teams are uneven physically, specific rules like that take away from the game. So for those that grew up like me watching the Bulls play, go back and watch NBA back then because we had a lot of great players. It wasn't just about the Bulls. I mean, that was back when the Suns were good in '93 and made it to the finals against the Bulls and sadly lost. But it was like Charles Barkley and Dan Marley, Kevin Johnson, that team. Or when the Bulls were playing the Utah Jazz at the time when they had Karl Malone and John Stockton. I mean, the reason I'm going on this big dissertation about my thoughts about the NBA is because I wanted to talk about this headline coming up that I'll share in a minute. That basically is interesting because there's a team that is just basically hanging on by a thread right now. That would be the Portland Trailblazers. So I saw this article and I was like, what is this? So Damian Lillard, the Portland Trailblazers, and what lies for a franchise in turmoil. So already, I've already hit my max of articles in the U.S. Today. But I've heard a little bit about this because the Portland Trailblazers were getting better, but now they're not. And it seems to me like, as I just explained about the business transactions of trading players, of players getting hurt, the whole thing in professional sports, of basically they're relying on a popular player. Damian Lillard has been a popular player. It's as if like people were talking about the demise of the Lakers the last couple of years have been reliant on them whether LeBron James is healthy or not. Sure, but this is a team sport. Why are we talking about one player when there's 5 players per team on the floor at a time? If that's the case, why don't they completely furbish the fucking way basketball is played and make it just horse or something like that? Because why do we care about specific players? Like, there needs to be as much as there needs to be like a spreading of wealth, there needs to be a spreading of player skill, in my opinion. And there used to be back years ago, in my opinion, of when I used to watch it hardcore. So after going on that tangent, that's probably why over the years too, I'm less in. I mean, I'm seriously actually really boycotting the NFL, which is why I'm not currently watching the game right now on Thursday Night Football. Because of the decisions that Goodell and a lot of the league officials have made in the recent years that have been, if, but I will say, go Cardinals. Anyway, so I want to talk about the fact that, like, because of me not being as much into these professional team sports, I've gotten really heavily into some other sports. I mean, I've always been a huge professional tennis fan. I think tennis is one of the best world sports you could watch, as well as football. And I mean football as in soccer in the US, but football around the world, real football. Uh, I love watching the Premier League. I love the World Cup. I just love the passion the fans have for that sport. And I mean, it can be dangerous in certain parts of the world going to those games. But I personally think that's what makes the sport great. And tennis, professional tennis, I've loved it since I was a kid, almost just as much as when I was into basketball. I it's always been my dream to attend every tennis Grand Slam. I want to go to the Australian Open. I want to go to the French Open. I want to go to Wimbledon, and I want to go to the U.S. Open at least once as a bucket list quest. Um, just because tennis tournament's awesome. And speaking of, in 2019, I had the privilege of actually attending the Miami Open for a day, which is a smaller tournament that leads up to Wimbledon. Yeah, it's one of the ones that in the hard court season. No, it'd be the French Open. Excuse me, leading up to the French Open. So it'd be ending the hard court season, leading up to the clay season, which is ended by the French Open and Roland Garros. Uh, and it was one of the best experiences because after all these years of watching tennis in videos or on TV or just college tennis or just playing tennis when I did back in the day, just for exercise and because I love the sport, it was great to see it live. And with the new era of players changing, I mean, Venus and Serena probably going to be retiring soon because of injuries and just the new generation of players and teams. A lot of players are starting to go out. They had story careers on the women's side, and then the men's side. I mean, you can't really go a day of the last 20 years without talking about either Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, or Novak Djokovic. I mean, my all-time favorite tennis player since I've been alive was Andy Roddick. And Andy Roddick retired many, many years ago just because he couldn't beat Federer in a friggin' tournament. He almost came too close to beating Federer, but Federer was just too good. He had these like epic shots in moments of sets that were unheard of. Uh, so it's interesting just, but that's the thing, that's the cool thing is like, even though I've had favorite players, and I know a lot of people even in eras before me were like Pete Sampras, Andre Agassi, um, it basically what I love about tennis is the respect that the players have for each other, the respect that the fans have for other players, and the fact that tennis is a hard sport and it's played pretty much year round. They don't really have that much time off as other sports do. So it's very fascinating to me, and I just will continue to always follow sports. And like I said, with the bucket list of going to all the Grand Slams, or at least one at this rate, um, we'll see. But the reason I bring that up is because as a novice over the years, I really got into racing. I've always found indie type racing to be very fascinating. I've tried NASCAR, and I'm sorry, left turns do not excite me. But the intricacy of driving in an Indy car through street course racing, um, fascinating me. And then I will admit, a couple years ago or whatever, when the Formula One created this documentary on the docu series. I guess it's more of a docu series on Netflix. I'm sure a lot of other people have become fans from this documentary because it's well shot, but it stories the principal, some of the owners, some of the managers of these well-known teams, and the drivers themselves, and going through a season, and it's just fascinating. What goes into, and you kind of get a little behind the scenes of what happens in Formula One. And because of this, I feel like there's been a lot more news coverage of Formula One racing. Uh, the popularity is blown up, which I think is great, which is hilarious considering how expensive Formula One is. Uh, but it's great to kind of see this. And I think also the diversity within the sport and the drivers that have been excelling in recent years. And the reason I bring this up is because there's like one race left of the season, the 2021 season coming up. And it's kind of a hunt between two of the best drivers we've probably seen in years. And I kind of wanted to talk about the fact that, like, that's what a lot of people are talking about. Who will win basically the title of best driver of 2021? Um, let's see here. So I'm going to share this article I found on Formula1.com. So between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, now I'm more team Lewis Hamilton than I am Max Verstappen. Sorry for all of you shippers of, well, not shippers, I shouldn't say it that way. The fans of Verstappen for Red Bull as opposed to Hamilton for Mercedes. But coming up in Abu Dhabi, this race is going to determine who the better one is. I mean, it's just this last race was epic. I mean, they bumped into each other as they were just trying to outdo one another. If you watch the clips of Verstappen and Hamilton on the race, it was epic. Um, but basically, you know, a lot of people are talking about these two drivers in Formula One, what their teams have done, what the technology and all of that that's been done into building these cars, because there's a lot of rules they have to follow so that everybody's on the fair playing field, but on the other end, how are they going to outdo each other with building these race cars every year that are just faster and more just better built with technology, with physics, safety for the driver. If you have not watched the documentary or the docuseries on Netflix, I highly recommend it because maybe when you watch that, you'll learn more about, you know, these drivers. So for those that'll watch this, you're seeing that I'm sharing the article from Formula One, but in some photos. But again, what I love about Formula One and why I've gotten really into it is it's another sport where the drivers respect each other, the teams respect each other, despite their rivalries and the hunt to be the best team and the best driver of the year every season, and to decide, who's really pushing themselves to the next level. I find the respect that they all have for each other admirable, and that's a big thing in me for sports right now. I don't like to see trash talking or fighting for no reason. I prefer it in good fun, but I also just like when everybody respects each other. So, long story short, as I've been rambling on this episode, for me, 2021 sports and review really has been kind of just from afar, paying attention to Formula One and to professional tennis. And I just wanted to kind of talk about sports and the fact that I don't really need a co-host. No, I would love to have guests on this podcast, but that's not really what it's about. It's about the fact that I want to keep my love for sports alive and talking about sports headlines and in my, you know, study and kind of novice awareness of what's going on in sports. So I know I've had a viewer this whole time, and whoever you are, thank you for viewing this live in a live stream. Those that'll be watching this in replay, thank you for watching this. And for those that'll be listening to this on the podcast, have a happy holiday season and a happy new year. And I don't know when the next episode is coming of Sports Chat Podcast, but thank you for listening, and I will see you on the next one.